And the reason they felt they needed to do that, Jesse, is because if they told their audience the truth, that when gas is the most expensive it's been, flights are super expensive, that 5,000 kids decided to spend a weekend in summer traveling across the country to go hear from conservative speakers, maybe the audience of The View would think twice about all of their ideas. That's why they felt so compelled to try to smear our wonderful summit this last weekend.
Yeah, they have nothing else to talk about.
For what felt like an eternity, The View occupied a unique space in the American media landscape. It was more than just a talk show. It was a cultural institution, a daily temperature check of hot-button issues filtered through the distinct personalities seated at the table. At its heart sat Whoopi Goldberg, the undisputed matriarch, projecting an air of unassailable authority. For years, she navigated this space with a blend of humor, exasperation, and a seemingly endless supply of righteous indignation, crafting an image of someone who not only understood the world, but held the definitive, unchallengeable opinion on it. The studio itself felt like a carefully constructed bubble, an echo chamber where commentary was king. Facts were often secondary to conviction, and the audience's applause acted as a constant, reaffirming heartbeat, validating every pronouncement. Within these walls, criticism rarely pierced the carefully maintained facade. It was a fortress built on charm, personality, and an almost religious belief in the correctness of their own perspective. But even the most fortified strongholds are vulnerable if the foundation is weak, or if an unexpected challenge bypasses the usual defenses. The catalyst for this particular shakeup was a segment discussing Turning Point USA's Youth Summit. The specific point of contention, the moment that would send ripples far beyond the studio, was the show's handling of external protesters. While neo-Nazis were present outside the event, The View's discussion, delivered with a casual air that belied its gravity, seemed to imply a connection, an acceptance, even a metaphorical embrace by Turning Point USA itself. This wasn't framed as a nuanced observation about protesters present in the vicinity of an event. It was presented in a way that, intentionally or not, linked the organization and its attendees to hateful ideologies.
Charlie Kirk's the founder and CEO of Turning Point USA and the author of the new book, The College Scam. So, Charlie, do you accept The View's apology?
I mean, regardless of whether or not I accept it, the question is, do our students accept it? That's really what's at heart here. They went after our 5,000 students at our event there, of high school and college kids. And look, I get attacked all the time. People say false things. I'm a public figure. But when you go after 16 and 17-year-olds that travel from across the country, that then have to live for the rest of their life with a shadow over them because someone at ABC says that they might be linked to neo-Nazis.
The true sting of this accusation lay in its target. Turning Point USA's summit attracted thousands of young people, high school and college students from across the nation. Many were just 16 or 17, traveling often for the first time to engage with political ideas. To suggest that they, by attending this event, were somehow aligned with or embracing neo-Nazis wasn't just a political smear. It was a deeply personal attack on thousands of individual teenagers and young adults. It risked attaching a permanent, toxic label to their lives, a shadow they might have to carry simply because they spent a weekend exploring conservative thought. This escalation from criticizing an organization's leadership to potentially smearing its young, impressionable attendees was a significant line crossed, one that would not go unanswered. The response came not from a traditional media rival, not from a pundit yelling on another cable news show, but from Charlie Kirk himself, the founder of Turning Point USA. His counterattack was notable precisely because it didn't happen in the conventional arena. He wasn't invited onto The View's set for a heated debate. He didn't storm the studio doors. Instead, he retreated to his own digital space, his podcast, and responded with a method that felt almost anti-television. It was calm, measured, and relentlessly focused on verifiable details. From the safety of his studio, potentially miles away, he didn't engage in theatrical outrage. He deployed logic grenades, presenting information like he'd accidentally wandered into a debate club that actually required, well, debate.
Welcome back. You know, in Monday's conversation about Turning Point USA, I put the young people at the conference in the same category as the protesters outside. And I don't like it when people make assumptions about me, and it's not any better when I make assumptions about other people, which I did. So, my bad. I'm sorry. Okay. So, the state, the U.S.
Kirk's initial, most crucial counterpoint was brutally simple. The neo-Nazis were outside protesters. They were on public land. Turning Point USA personnel actively worked to keep them separate and even tried to have them removed. This was a factual distinction The View's commentary seemed to gloss over entirely. By presenting this clear, verifiable reality, Kirk starkly highlighted the inaccuracy at the heart of The View's statement. He didn't need dramatic music or split screens. The quiet presentation of facts spoke volumes, exposing the potentially misleading nature of the on-air discussion. But Kirk's pushback extended beyond just this incident. He used the opportunity to critique what he framed as The View's broader detachment and perceived elitism. He pointed to past instances where hosts had made sweeping generalizations about voters, sometimes using data points in ways he argued were dismissive or inaccurate, particularly regarding working-class individuals or specific demographics labeled uneducated. His argument wasn't just about this one instance. It was about a pattern he saw, where the show's commentary seemed disconnected from the realities faced by many Americans, operating instead on convenient narratives and demographic stereotypes. He suggested that this disconnect was precisely why they struggled to understand why young people would flock to a conservative summit in the first place.
But look, what did it take for us to get to the point of an apology? We had to threaten a lawsuit, Jesse. And by the way, we're still entertaining it. We're talking to some of the best lawyers out there that are experts in this. And as you know, these things can be very complicated. There's a lot of facts and circumstances around it. But we're not going to let this go, because you should not be able to smear 5,000 high school and college kids and then just be able to walk away with it.
And then the amplification machine of the internet roared to life. Charlie Kirk's calm, data-infused response, particularly his public mention of consulting lawyers and considering a lawsuit, exploded across social media platforms. Clips were pulled, edited, stitched, and shared at a dizzying pace. Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, TikToks, and Twitter threads became instant forums for dissecting The View's comments and Kirk's rebuttal. It turned into a Category 5 memetor storm, a perfect confluence of public frustration with traditional media, the viral power of short-form video, and the inherent drama of seeing a major network show challenged so directly, albeit remotely. People who hadn't watched The View in years suddenly saw snippets of the show being fact-checked in real time by online commentators. This digital wildfire created undeniable pressure. Viewers, armed with shared clips and quick Google searches, began asking pointed questions that bypassed the usual media gatekeepers. The cozy, self-affirming environment of The View suddenly felt exposed to the harsh light of online scrutiny. Questions like, wait, did she just make that up? And incredulous observations like, and how did this get applauded? Began circulating, chipping away at the show's aura of unquestionable authority. The sacred bubble of daytime TV, built on personality and performance, began to hiss with the unmistakable sound of slow deflation as external reality pushed back against the internal narrative.
Her disgusting, gross elitism and her complete out-of-touch nature with respect to the rest of the world. Sunny Hostin goes on The View and decides now would be a great time to dump all over the so-called uneducated.
What we did not have is white women who voted about 52%, right, for Donald Trump. Uneducated white women, is my understanding.
Just because you didn't go to college doesn't mean you're stupid, and it doesn't mean that you don't have wisdom. You can go to college and get a bunch of irrelevant facts about how men can allegedly give birth or whatever they teach. But I said this to our team. I said working people, the muscular class, including working women, they are so in favor of Trump, and they don't want to be called stupid or uneducated.
The pressure, both from public opinion galvanized by the internet storm and the serious threat of legal action detailed in the cease and desist letter, proved too much to withstand. The inevitable outcome arrived swiftly. The View issued a public apology to Turning Point USA. It was a notable moment, not because it was particularly heartfelt or dramatic, but because it happened at all. Delivered early in the broadcast before a quick cut to commercial, it felt less like genuine contrition and more like a necessary, legally advised maneuver to quell the storm. It was a clear signal that the conventional defenses, ignoring criticism, doubling down, relying on the echo chamber effect, were insufficient against this new form of challenge. But the real lasting impact wasn't the apology itself. It was the subtle shift that became perceptible in Whoopi Goldberg and the show's overall energy afterward. This wasn't the kind of dramatic, crying meltdown you'd see scripted in a drama. It was quieter, more nuanced, and arguably far more revealing. The fire in her eyes seemed a bit dimmer. The unshakable confidence had a discernible crack in its foundation. The show itself felt different. Topics became safer, the infamous hot topics felt a little less fiery, and there seemed to be a greater reliance on scripted segues and carefully managed discussion points. The spontaneous, often volatile energy that defined the show felt tempered, cautious. It was like watching someone desperately trying to reenact a highlight reel while quietly wondering if the audience was still buying the performance. The studio, once a realm of untouchable commentary, started to feel just a little exposed, a little less bulletproof.
We begin with a shocking apology just a short time ago from the ladies of The View to Turning Point USA. A war of words broke out after the conservative group was rallying the next generation of voters at its youth summit in Tampa, Florida this weekend. And the liberal panel just couldn't help themselves. The group sent a scathing cease and desist letter after hosts on The View suggested that Turning Point had embraced neo-Nazis who showed up outside the event.
This moment wasn't just a fleeting controversy, it was a cultural inflection point, a stark demonstration of how the media landscape has fundamentally changed. It proved that you no longer needed a seat at the table, a network contract, or a live studio audience to effectively challenge powerful voices in traditional media. Charlie Kirk's passive takedown, calm, factual, and amplified by the internet, was a perfect example of this new dynamic. He didn't argue in a ring with gloves. He dropped a fact bomb in a parallel dimension, and the ripple effect caused The View's studio chair to squeak a little louder. He didn't defeat them in a debate they were prepared for. He exposed a vulnerability in a monologue they delivered, thinking they were safe, using a rebuttal they never saw coming in a timeline where Google searches hurt more than clever comebacks. The beautiful, almost poetic irony of it all is that the internet didn't need The View's permission to fact-check or critique. While the echo chamber inside the studio bounced their voices back, creating a false sense of consensus, outside, in the vast, interconnected digital space, millions of people were cross-referencing, sharing notes, and hitting pause and rewind on their clips. It was like the show was suddenly being audited by a nation of meme-making, receipt-pulling digital bloodhounds, and the audit results were being broadcast instantly to everyone.
You let them in and you knew what they were. Right. So you are complicit. I want to make a quick clarification about the neo-Nazi Turning Point event. They were outside protesters. My point was more metaphorical, that you embraced them at your thing, I felt.
Well, fast forward to this morning. The hosts apologized before quickly cutting to commercial.
And so, the illusion, carefully constructed over decades, began to shatter. Not with the expected fireworks or dramatic confrontations, but with a quiet, data-driven roast session happening far beyond the safety of commercial breaks and pre-approved talking points. This wasn't about left versus right in the traditional sense. It was about common sense and verifiable facts challenging an empire built on prepackaged applause and high-volume certainty. When common sense finally got a Wi-Fi signal and could broadcast its findings directly to the audience, many viewers realized just how long they'd been clapping for sound bites that dissolved on contact with reality. The most telling aspect was the silence that followed. Not just the muted energy from Whoopi, but the noticeable caution from the entire machine around her. There wasn't a robust defense or a defiant counterargument from ABC or The View. Because what could they say? The core factual claim about the protesters was easily disproven by anyone with a smartphone. The logic pointing out the disconnect between the show's commentary and external realities was airtight. Any forceful attempt to fight back would have only drawn more attention, poured gasoline on the fire, and further highlighted the discrepancy between their narrative and the observable facts.
Sean, something that struck me in the cease and desist letter was the sentence that specifically The View hosts insidiously and cavalierly stated that TPUSA let the neo into its event, metaphorically embraced them, and it went on. Insidiously and cavalierly. And I felt that perfectly summed up exactly what those women were saying, which is something so deeply toxic and also so lightly thrown out there.
And so false. I mean, these were protesters outside of the event, right? They couldn't get in. These were not neo-Nazis Inside of Turning Point USA, they were protesting outside on public grounds, and Turning Point tried to remove them.
Instead, they did what most media machines do when caught in the headlights of accountability. They blinked, offered a minimalist apology, and tried to keep driving, hoping the moment would pass. But the internet didn't forget. The video clips lived on, referenced, shared, and used as shorthand for the moment when the illusion cracked. It became a symbol of a traditional media institution being held accountable, not by a peer, but by a guy with a camera, a Wi-Fi connection, and the willingness to point out that the emperor's wardrobe was picked out by BuzzFeed rather than tailored from truth. Weeks passed, but the impact lingered. People still referenced the Charlie Kirk view moment. It changed the way some viewers watched the show, making them more aware of the mechanisms at play, the reliance on specific reactions, the careful framing of topics. Charlie, meanwhile, moved on, seemingly unfazed, like someone who had flattened a building with a single precise blow and didn't feel the need to watch the rubble settle. That's the power of the modern, internet-amplified takedown. It doesn't need to be loud or prolonged by the instigator. The internet does the amplification, turning one solid point into a decentralized, ongoing discussion that bypasses traditional media filters.
Airtight. Any attempt to fight back would only pour gasoline on the fire.
I don't want to say too much, but we're going to have a lot of fun at the Department of Education. We're going to have a lot of fun.
Can I tell you something? Like, I've had quite a few people contact me about that particular post. Like, I'm sure I have 1/100th of what you're getting, but people are contacting me about cabinet posts. I'm like, I got
look,
nothing.
I mean, yeah, I'm actually, after this conversation, heading to Mar-a-Lago for a week, and we have a lot to sift through, and if I could be helpful, I have asked. I want to be actively involved in all things education, as you can imagine. And
Whoopi Goldberg, for all her on-screen confidence and showbiz armor forged over decades, ran headfirst into that unavoidable digital timeline. There was no screaming fit caught on camera, no dramatic walk-off that went viral for its emotional intensity. It was subtler, more insidious, and ultimately perhaps more impactful. It was the hollow, sinking realization that no matter how confidently you speak, how much the audience applauds, or how much the machine around you protects you, the quiet brutality of receipts talked louder, broadcast to everyone, everywhere. This wasn't just another online spat, another back and forth in the endless culture wars. This was the day a fundamental truth about the current media landscape was laid bare. Traditional power doesn't guarantee immunity from factual challenge, especially when that challenge is calm, clear, and instantly distributed by a global network of digital bloodhounds. It was the day Charlie Kirk, armed with little more than a Wi-Fi signal and an overachieving grasp of readily available facts, managed to puncture the long-held delusion that mainstream media talk shows are impenetrable fortresses of truth, immune to external audit. It wasn't a victory of ideology. It was a victory of process, of demonstrating that clarity and data could bypass the carefully staged drama and pre-programmed applause.
Do you think if a liberal came to speak at University of Kentucky, they'd give an open mic like I just did to a conservative and had a discussion like this?
I certainly hope they would.
No, they wouldn't. Because speech is not a left-wing value. That is why they have to deploy shock troops called Antifa to go after everywhere I go. When I go to University of California, Davis next week, there has to be 120 police officers because of the threats, the violent threats of liberals that want me dead, that want to disrupt our events.
Do you think, as Kirk might put it, that if a liberal came to speak at a deeply conservative university, they'd get the same reception, the same open mic and respectful hearing that conservative speakers often demand and sometimes receive, albeit under heavy security? He'd argue, likely correctly, that the infrastructure of protest and disruption often seems more organized on one side, requiring police escorts for speakers just trying to hold an event. This highlights the double standard he perceives, where one side claims victimhood while the other, he argues, actively tries to shut down opposing speech. He believes speech isn't a universally valued principle for everyone in the debate, and that contradiction, like the one he exposed on The View, is ripe for exposure. Daytime TV operated for decades as if it were a sacred oracle, dispensing wisdom from on high. Glittering sets, carefully manufactured outrage, and an audience trained better than Pavlov's dogs to respond on cue. The host could utter almost anything, package it with conviction, and be met with approving nods, enthusiastic cheers, and the occasional, "Yes, Queen," shout from the crowd. Logic wasn't typically the headliner. High-volume certainty was. Enter Charlie Kirk, who didn't play by their rules. He didn't ask for an invitation, didn't engage in a shouting match, didn't stage a dramatic walk-off. He simply sat down, hit record, and broke the fourth wall of daytime delusion with the effortless precision of breaking a dollar store mirror. Because the ultimate punchline, the exquisite twist, wasn't about what he said, but how he said it, and where. He didn't need to match their energy or volume. He weaponized clarity itself. He took the swirling vortex of opinion-laden chaos and calmly pointed to the verifiable contradictions, the simple factual errors, as if saying, "I'm not angry, I'm just deeply disappointed. And here is precisely why, step by step, with evidence." It was the verbal equivalent of watching someone calmly untangle a hopelessly knotted necklace while the other person on stage insisted it was a deadly noose. And suddenly, in that stark contrast, Whoopi Goldberg, the long-held empress of daytime commentary, looked undeniably human, mortal, vulnerable. Not because someone yelled louder or was more charismatic, but because someone dared to bring a simple pie chart to a shouting match, and it was broadcast directly to everyone. That precise moment, when a carefully edited, highly produced TV segment gets forensically fact-checked by a guy in a hoodie on YouTube and goes viral, that's the crack in the matrix. That's when the audience realizes the Emperor's wardrobe wasn't just non-existent, it was actively misleading, picked out not by truth, but by vibes and narrative convenience. What made it all the more impactful, the more better in this context, is that Whoopi wasn't even present for the rebuttal. This wasn't a gladiatorial contest fought face-to-face. It was a takedown done in a parallel dimension, a truth bomb dropped from a distance, and the physical effects were felt back in the studio. She didn't lose a debate she was part of. She lost a monologue she delivered assuming she was safe, against a rebuttal she never even saw coming, in a timeline where Google searches hurt more than carefully crafted comebacks. The deepest irony? The echo chamber works by bouncing your own voice back so often, you start believing it's a harmonious choir of agreement. But outside the studio, across the vast expanse of the internet, people were comparing notes, doing their own research, hitting pause, rewind, and verify. The View was suddenly being audited by a nation of digital detectives, and the findings were not flattering. And so the illusion shattered, not with a bang or a dramatic collapse, but with a quiet, data-driven roast session taking place far beyond the safety of commercial breaks. That is the chilling power of a passive takedown in the digital age. No shared microphone is needed, no invitation required, just a well-placed fact, a clear point of logic, dropped into the public stream, and poof, an empire built on personality and applause can find its foundation eroding under the weight of its own contradictions. Now, the question isn't, will she bounce back? Of course she will. This is television. Personalities are resilient, and the show must go on. Everyone gets a second chance. A chance to recalibrate, to try and restore the old magic. The more relevant, lingering question is, will the audience ever unsee it? Can they ever clap with the same unthinking fervor again, knowing what lies beneath the polished varnish, the scripted segues, and the carefully curated outrage? Because once the magic trick is explained, once the mechanism is exposed, you don't marvel at it the same way. When the curtain lifts, the wizard looks, well, just pretty regular. So, the next time Whoopi Goldberg raises an eyebrow, lowers her voice for emphasis, or delivers a thundering monologue with that signature blend of righteous fury and absolute certainty, just know that somewhere out there, potentially miles away, there's a voice calmly checking the math. And you can bet your last brain cell the internet will be watching too. Calculators ready, clips being prepared, waiting to see if the facts align with the performance. It wasn't just a takedown, it was a reckoning, a signal flare in the ongoing war between narrative and reality. And for Whoopi Goldberg, it came not with a scream or a visible meltdown in the traditional sense, but with 1,000 retweets and a single brutal fact bomb from a guy who never even had to walk onto her stage to change the conversation.